All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anyways, however many people we are, here we are. My name's Thom. And I've been asked to talk about the characteristics that are foundational to a relational child and youth care approach. And Jim talked a little bit about child and youth care this morning, so I'm not going to cover that territory. But basically, being a child and youth care worker is about how we are, who we are, while we do what we do. So it's about how we are, how I am in relationship with you, for example, how we are, who we are. What kind of person am I? Who am I? Because it's a person-to-person relationship that we have with young people, right? Therefore, your person is important. So how you are, who you are, while you do, because child and youth care is action-oriented. Sitting back and reflecting is wonderful, but doing really helps a lot while you do what you do. And that what you do is a lot of what I'm going to talk about over the next hour or so. So I gave you all a copy of this. Excuse me, just to save you making notes. These are actually characteristics that are associated with a relational child and youth care approach. They're organized around this thing in the middle called BID, BID, excuse me, which refers to being, interpreting, and doing, which a lot of us talk about in North America as a simple way of thinking about the process of intervention with a young person. IB, as in be in relationship, be with, be there, meet them where they're at, all that kind of stuff. And in being in relationship with this young person, notice I'm not saying having a relationship. I'm talking about being in relationship, and I'm going to open that up a little bit. But I be in this place with this person, and in that context, I have to interpret what's happening. I have to make sense out of it. You know, Jim says this morning, young person comes in the room and swears at you. He says that's pain-based behavior, right? So we have to interpret everything that happens. So I stand here and I go, oh, fuck. And you have to go like, what's that about? You know, I wonder why he's saying that. I wonder what that means to him and what it means to me. Because we do talk about being in relationship, therefore what it means to you and what it means to me are both important. So we interpret, and then based on our interpretation, we act, or we do. So if I, excuse me, perceive your behavior as aggressive and threatening towards me, and if I interpret it like that, then I respond or I react based on that interpretation. Being, interpreting, doing. Well, our friend, and I mean our friend as in the friend of the field, James Freeman in California, took all these characteristics that you see listed there and organized them according to this BID framework, which is why they're grouped the way they are. So essentially, excuse me, oh, that hurts. These characteristics essentially describe our way of being in the world with young people or young people and families. By our way, I mean a child and youth care way of being in the world. And notice I'm using the expression being in the world, because these are not a set of techniques. These are some characteristics of how we are who we are, which is our way of being in the world. Ideally, we're this way with everybody. If you're a supervisor, you're this way with your staff. If you're a child care worker, you're this way with young people. If you work with families, you're this way with them. And in the best of all worlds, we would be this way with our own children and spouses and everything, but that gets a little bit more complicated. They've been drawn, these characteristics, from, we started out originally, a group of us, about 12 of us, trying to identify what we saw as, if you want, themes in the field. And we've continued to do this over time through reading and, you know, the literature, going to workshops, listening to people talk, et cetera, and asking ourselves, what are the reoccurring themes that show up as characteristics of our field, of our way of being? And it distinguishes our way of working with children, young people, and families. Being, interpreting, and doing is the framework for intervention that is informed by all of these characteristics. So what I'm going to do over the next hour or so is open these up one at a time, so that by the time we're finished, my goal is for you to be quite familiar with all these characteristics, and we're going to talk about them a bit as we go through the next hour or so. One of the primary focuses of child and youth care practice is what we might call making moments meaningful. How does this moment with this child relate to the overall goals that we've established together for where we want that child to end up? So a child who struggles to be different in the world, perhaps wants to be different in the world, act in a different way. Then I ask myself constantly, how is this moment with this child possibly related to that goal? And how can I connect this moment with this child to that goal? And as I said, this can also apply in our work with, if we're supervisors, in our work with staff, for example. How can this moment with this staff be helpful in terms of them reaching the goals that they've established? So it's all about how do we make moments meaningful, sometimes referred to in working with young people as the therapeutic use of daily life events. So to open them up, I'm going to start up in the top left-hand corner with the word love. And it's a relatively new addition to this evolving list that's been going on for a number of years. Because in North America, at least, about 20 years ago, we threw out the word love. We put it away. We talked about care. We talked about caregiving. We talked about, but the original pioneers, people like Acorn or Montessori or people whose names you know, they all talked about love. They did their work for the love of children. And then it got complicated for us because love got confused with sex and sexuality and the abuse of children. And then we started to worry that people who said they love children, ooh, that doesn't sound so good, right? Because maybe they mean that other kind of dirty love. Well, in the last 7 or 8 years, the word love has come back into the literature. You know, whether it's Mark Smith, who's here, and, you know, has been writing about love over the last 10 years or so and bringing it back and making all the appropriate distinctions. So Mark Smith in Scotland writes about love. Zeni Thumbido in South Africa says that love and child and youth care walk hand in hand in the treatment of children. So the word love has come back. So I want to start with that this morning, just to tell you it's all okay if you love children, you know, and it's okay for us to bring that back. And by the way, that's important to children, you know. I mean, there's such a difference between being someone who's loved, you know, and I'm not talking about the love I have for my grandchild, but loved. It's so different than being cared for or looked after or whatever those other words we use are, because those other words are less intimate somehow. And yet child and youth care practice in its most effective form is very intimate. And I mean intimate in the sense that it is person to person. And that's a definition of intimacy. So love has come back. This whole corner up here that talks about being, the next one you'll see up there on the board is this thing called being in relationship. Notice that that does not say having a relationship. We used to talk about child and youth care as being relationship-based, and I would have a relationship. Larry Brentro, who was one of the major authors of The Circle of Courage, when he was writing in that book Jim referred to this morning, The Other 23 Hours with Al Trishman, he said, the effective child care worker develops a relationship with the child, which then can be used to help the child conform to social norms. See, the relationship was a tool of social control or of manipulation. I get to have a good relationship with you, therefore you will do what it is that I ask you to do. And how did we define a good relationship? Well, you had a good relationship if the kids would do what you asked them to do. You could always tell who had a good relationship with kids on a staff team if you were working in group care. The people who had good relationships, kids were compliant and did what they were told. The folks who didn't have good relationships, things didn't go so well in their shift. And that's almost how we used to define a good relationship. But now we talk about being in relationship. That the relationship is this place co-created by you and I. It's somehow in this, what I like to call this in-between between us. So we don't talk about relationship in the sense of I'm the child care worker and she's the child. But now we talk about it differently. In this in-between between us, this relational space that we create, we ask ourselves these kinds of questions. Is this a place of safety? In this in-between, do you feel safe? Do I feel safe? So is it a place of safety? Is it a place of learning? Is it a place of? So we're focused a lot. And when you talk with kids, excuse me, who have been in care and ask them to identify some of the things that made a difference, they very seldom say to you, well, you know, that 12-week anger management program that you made me take 3 times over the course of the 5 years really changed my life forever. They typically say things like, there was this person. They start that way. There was this person. And then when you talk with them about this person, they'll talk about things how I felt like it was safe to tell her about my fantasies or dreams. You know, like I remember this one girl, Carlene, talking about she kind of had her eye on this guy at school, and she really wanted to have a relationship with him, and how she came back to the group home one day and was able to sit down with this woman, a child care worker, and share with her her dreams and her fantasies, because it was a safe place. And you know, for many of our kids, this is a very unusual experience, to find safety in relationship. We've begun to talk more and more about what we call relational safety. A place, this relational space, where I feel safe to be me, whoever I am, in the context of a relationship with another person. And for many of our kids, it's an unusual experience, because their experience of somebody's being called and they aren't there. This experience for most of them of being in relationship with somebody else, well, it wouldn't go like, is this a place of safety? It would go like, this is a place of pain. This is a place of hurt. This is a place where I don't feel okay to be me, and therefore I must hide. And so kids pull out of these relational spaces with us because they don't feel safe. So we constantly think about being in relationship and how is this space defined and experienced by the young person and by ourselves. We participate with others as they live their lives. We're involved in the day-to-day of life. Now, for people who don't understand social care or child and youth care or however we call it, the idea of just doing things with people doesn't seem terribly significant. But as you know, doing dishes with somebody can be really powerful. You know, think of some of the conversations that you've had with kids that are really important. They didn't happen in a sitting down counseling. They happened when you were doing something. It could be anything from doing the dishes to taking out the garbage to driving somewhere. Times when we typically weren't looking at each other. You know, there was no look at me when I'm talking to you kind of thing. You'd often side by side, right? And you're doing something together. So you've both got to focus. So we participate in their lives by being engaged in their lives, and we participate with them in doing things, because that gives us both an additional focus. So that if I start to feel a little bit uncomfortable with what's going on, like maybe I'm getting a little bit scared of how much I'm telling you, I can pull out and focus on this other thing. Stupid fucking garbage bags always break, don't they? or whatever it happens to be. I can focus on something else for a moment. And we both know that that's just fine, because that's you monitoring how safe you feel in the context of this thing we've created together. We are specialists, child and youth care workers, in hanging out. I'm going to tell you my favorite example. I was working. Sorry, I was still there. I ripped it off. Oh. I can fix this. Really. And if I can't, you'll help me. I know you don't need this. He needs it, apparently. Is that okay? All right. So I'm working with this supervisor who's new to a program. Now, at the risk of, being sexual stereotyping and everything, he was a guy, and he was really action-oriented, and he thought everybody should be doing something all the time, like playing a sport, doing a game, but like acting somehow. And so I was in the kitchen with him, and he was looking outside, and there was this young woman there, a child care worker, and she was sitting on a bench beside another young person who happened to be a child in care. And this is what was going on. Every once in a while, the child care worker would reach down, pick up a pebble, and throw it at a can over there. A minute later, the kid would reach down, pick up a pebble, and throw it at the can. Then the child care worker would do it. And then the kid would do it. And then the child care worker would do it. You see what's going on here? Rhythmicity, isn't it? Right? Engaging in rhythmic interaction with somebody else with no other demand. And this supervisor's looking out the window, and I'm the expert consultant, you see, so I have all the answers. So he says to me, "Look at that woman. She's just sitting there. They're not doing anything." Now, you and I both know. I don't know if you use this expression, but in North America, there's this sort of jokey thing about parents talking to their kids, the 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds. Where did you go? Out. What did you do? Nothing. Right? You did that a lot when you were a kid, didn't you? Right? You just hung out and did nothing. And the end result was you ended up developing relationships, some of which might have lasted you your whole life. So, where'd you go? Out. What did you do? Nothing. Nothing. I just developed meaningful relationships with another human being who's going to be my friend for the rest of my life. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. So, he's saying, look at them, they're doing nothing. I say, yeah, I can see how it looks that way. Interpretation, right? Being, interpreting, doing. I'm looking out there. You know what I'm seeing? I'm seeing this child care worker engaged in rhythmic interaction in a safe moment with a child who probably hasn't had many of them with the authorities in her life. And he's looking out, seeing these people who are just doing nothing. So I say to him, well, I guess you better talk to her about that when she comes in. Fortunately, I knew the woman, and I knew that she knew what she was doing, right? So she comes in. He says, I was watching you outside there, and, I really believe we should always be doing things with kids, and you were just sitting out there on the bench, and so we need to talk about, doing things. And she gave him a nice little lecture about the importance of hanging out and appearing to be doing nothing. And there's a big difference between just hanging out like that and doing nothing. I know what doing nothing looks like. I see it all the time. Going to a program, there's a staff sitting off in the corner somewhere, and there are the kids doing whatever they do. That person's not doing anything often, right? Now, sometimes they're engaged in intentional disengagement or whatever, and I understand that. But you know the difference. So if you happen to be a supervisor and you see one of your staff just sitting there with a kid, they may not know what they're doing. And so maybe it'll be important for you to help them understand how that can be a very powerful moment if, in fact, they're focused on the together, right? The being with. So this staff doing this was focused on what she was doing, right? We're sitting here engaging in rhythmic interaction. And we all know that rhythmicity is a powerful foundation of relationship development. And engaging in moments of safety is a powerful therapeutic intervention for a child that has been traumatized. For the child just to experience safety in relationship is sometimes the most powerful thing that they can experience to begin, at least, the healing process. And we hang in. It's a characteristic of how we are, who we are. We know that there are good times and bad times, right? Because of how we think, we're able to realize that things have been going really good and now they're going really bad, right? A good day just went sour, and we hang in through that. Or a good period just went sour, and we got to hang in through the week, where the child who was perhaps being compliant, or at least doing what we hoped she would do, is now telling us all to leave her alone in no uncertain terms, and not necessarily in the politest of ways. And yesterday, she thought you were wonderful, and today you're the biggest fucking jerk in her life. And we hang in through those periods of time when things change. But there's also another way that we need to hang in, and that is when things go well. In North America, we have a lot of pressure on programs to move kids quickly, especially group care programs. And so once a young person starts doing well, there's often pressure from the system for this young person to move. But we know there are plateaus, there are descents, there are peaks and valleys. And so we also hang in when times are well, because we know that if we maintain this over a period of time, this will be a good thing. But we also know that it's entirely possible that this is going to happen, and we're going to have to work to come back up to that plateau or that level again. So we hang out and we hang in, two important characteristics of our work. We focus on working in the now. What's going on between you and I right now is probably reflective of how we both are in the world anyways. You know? So we work with what we're presented at this moment. Fritz Rettel, a grandfather of child and youth care in North America, once said, "We hear a lot that children won't talk to us." He says it's because we're talking to them about the wrong things. What they're interested in is what's going on in their life right now. So we focus on the right now because that's also what's important to the young person. And as Larry Brentro says, you can focus on the now, work in this moment. Think of it like the home page of a computer screen. From this moment, we can link to other things. But if you begin with this moment, working in the now, young people will connect with you more readily. And also, how you are with me right now probably reflects how you are in general in the world. If you're a humorous person, you probably joke a lot in all kinds of relationships. If you feel threatened, you feel threatened in many places. If you're angry in many places. So how you are right now is just as important as how you were last Thursday with the teacher in the classroom when you got in trouble. And Fritz Rettel also said that our counseling is what we now call counseling on the go. He said we're kind of like, he called it counseling on the hoof, like the shoe of a horse. He said we kind of like gallop along with kids through life. And we do a little bit here, and a little bit there, and a little bit here. And one day this fonctionnaire from the Quebec government came into this program that I was working at. And he wanted the staff to make counseling notes, the childcare workers, you know, the ones who wake kids up and get them off to school. He wanted them to make counseling notes, like the counselors made or the social workers made when they sat down and had a session. And this childcare worker says to the functionaire, "Okay, so let me see if you want me to track my counseling with the children, right?" And the guy says, "Yep, that's what I want." He says, "Okay, so how am I going to do this? We've got 12 kids in our program, so I'll carry 12 clipboards around with me all day. And I'll go and wake up Mary, and she'll tell me to fuck off. All right, I tried to wake up Mary. She told me to fuck off. We'll continue this later. I've got to wake up John. Woke up John. Where's John's sheet? Here it is. Well, can you imagine tracking that? And you can't. All you can do at the end of the day maybe is summarize it, or at different points in the day. So our counseling happens like that. I try to wake you up. You don't want to get up. So one day I'm in this other residential program where I'm working, and there's this boy, and he's in bed, and he won't get up. He's just like, staff tries to get him up, he refuses. Staff's still got to wake up the other kids, still got to get breakfast going. Staff goes back a few times to try and get him up, right? He tells the staff to leave him alone, in the nicest of ways, of course. Eventually I'm there, So the staff comes over, and they weren't happy having a consultant this particular program. So the staff comes over to me in front of the other staff and says, so you're the expert. He's refusing to get out of bed. What should I do? I think about what a wonderful setup this is for me. I'll just give him the right answer. So I say to the guy, well, do you have a newspaper? He says, yeah, got this morning's paper. I say, well, I want you to go to the financial section, and I want you to open up the newspaper to the financial section, and I want you to read him the financial news from this morning's paper. The guy says, how's that going to help? I say, I don't know, we're going to find out. So the guy goes into the kid's room after he goes downstairs and makes sure the other kids are on the bus getting off to school, and make sure somebody's getting started with their lunch preparations and doing the other things with kids, all of which he's making notes about, of course. So he goes back to the kid's room, finally with the newspaper, and he sits down and reads it. Well, I had to go away for a while, so I come back later, and I say to the guy, so what happened when you read the financial pages to the kid? He said, well, he got really pissed off with me. He said, shut up. I don't want to hear that crap. Leave me alone. I said, then what happened? He said, then he got up out of bed and tried to push me out of the room. I said, and then what happened? He says, well, we worked it through, and now he's off at school. This is counseling on the go, right? Well, the end result, of course, is I could say to the guy, so I understand now, you don't know how to deal with passive resistance, but you really know how to deal with aggression, right? Because when the kid got angry, you could deal with it. And when he was just being passively resistant, you didn't know how to deal with it. So maybe that's a goal that we can work on together. So that moment is not just about the child, is it? It's also about the staff in relationship with the young people. Being in the moment, working in the now, applies not only to children, but also to staff. So that now we've established a goal, right, for the staff. And, of course, we talk about flexibility and individuality. Henry Meyer, who was my mentor for many years, once said, if we treat all the children the same, none of them will be special. He was talking about having the same consequence for everybody, So imagine you're working in a group home, and there's 6 kids, and 4 of them run away on the same night at the same time, okay? Now, what are some of the reasons why any one of those kids might have run away? They all ran away at the same time. Let's just brainstorm for fun. Why might one of them have run away? Bored. Karen Vandervan said, if all you got is walls, wall climbing will become the children's favorite sport. And if your program is boring, expect them to leave, right? Bill Glasser said, originally there were two needs, to love and to be loved. And as he got older, and he wrote Choice Theory, he decided there was 5 basic human needs. And one of them was to have fun, a basic human need. So one runs away because he's bored, okay?
Make friends with the one's bored.
The other one's wants to make friends with the ones who's bored, okay? So if I run away with her, maybe and we'll be friends, okay? Anybody else? Now, come on. Just couldn't do the routine, the bedtime routine, okay? Somebody else said something?
Feeling afraid.
Feeling threatened? Yeah. There was this group home in Montreal one time, all the kids ran away all the time. It turned out the staff was actually selling the kids. Seems like a good decision, doesn't it, to run away? Anybody else?
Conflict at home, something going on with a sibling or somebody at home.
Okay.
Feel the need to
Feel the need to go home. And maybe later we'll unpack what each of these reasons might mean, but all these 4 kids ran away for different reasons, right? Now, she's bored, and there's a need to have fun. He wants a relationship, and there's a need for belonging, right? He feels threatened, and there's a need for safety. And we can go through them all, can't we? You know, who knows what the structure means to this young person who can't do it? So we need to open that up a little bit more to figure out what it's about. They all have different needs, but they do a similar behavior. Why would we treat them all the same? So when this child who feels threatened comes back, the last thing we want is to position ourselves aggressively or in a threatening manner. That's it, go to your room, right? For this child who can't handle the structure, we say, that's it, tomorrow night, in 15 minutes early. Oh, great, more structure, whatever it happens to be. For this person who needs to have a relationship, that's it, you two can't hang out together anymore. That's how often we do more to kids of what we've been doing that causes them to react to meet their own needs. Unfortunately, they also often act in a way that gets them more of what they don't need. So we need to think about this thing called individuality, both in terms of who this young person is, but also in terms of how we respond or don't respond to her behavior. So there's this boy who used to run away from this group home I knew, and he didn't used to run away. He was always late coming back to the group home. They'd say, be home at 10. He'd get there at 10:30, 10:45, 11 o'clock. They'd say, be home at 9. He'd get there at 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock. Everybody's putting rules on him, you know, imposing limits, telling him, don't you love how we do more of things that don't work? It's like, you're supposed to be in at 10, you come in at 10:15, tomorrow come in 15 minutes early. You're still late. The next day, come home half an hour early. You're still late. Now you have to come home an hour early. It's not working, so let's do more of it. Well, this child care worker was there, and he said to the boy, do you know what time it is? And the kid said, no. And the staff said, well, the clock's right there. Kid couldn't read time. All this time he was late, he couldn't read time. He wasn't intentionally being late, but he also didn't feel safe enough to say, I can't read time. Because here he is, 13 or 14 or whatever age he was, and embarrassed that he couldn't tell time. Right? Well, so the staff's response to him being late was to go to the drawer and find a cheap watch that somebody had left behind, give it to the kid, show him set the time properly, showed him what it would look like when 5 minutes passed, and then kicked him out of the house. Now, go out of the house and come back when that hand is right here. The kid says, I'm late and you're sending me out? The staff says, yes. So the kid goes outside and just does this. And he comes back inside. And the staff says to him, that's really good. Okay, now we'll practice again. You have to go outside again. Only this time I want you to wait for 10 minutes. And here's how you know when it's 10 minutes. 2 of these things makes it 10 minutes. So they spend a little bit of time learning to tell time. And that became part of the boys' program. And lo and behold, no consequences were necessary of the we will punish you for being late type. That's about individuality, but it's also about flexibility. About staff being flexible enough to say, there is a rule, but it's not working, and therefore we have to do something different to meet this child's needs in a different manner. So this is all about being, characteristics that are associated with being. Love, being in relationship, counseling on the go, working in the now, about how we are with this young person. Do you want me to clarify any of them any more than I already have? Or do you want to fight with me about them? Or do you want me to tell you stories about them? Whatever, you know. As we go through the next period of time that we have together, now that you've had at least a few minutes to know a little bit about how I am or who I am, I want to make this invitation, which I could have made right at the very beginning, which is you can stop me anytime. You can take me anywhere you want to go if you have questions about any of these, and I'll be really comfortable with that. It's my job for us to stay on track. I could have told you that at the very beginning, but you see, we've only had 20 minutes together, but our relationships are changing. The in-between between us is changing as I talk and as we have momentary, brief connections with each other, which are probably some of the most important things that happen. The Seattle Marriage Clinic in Seattle, Washington, claims that they can predict the success or failure of your current relationship with a partner by watching only 15 minutes of the two of you interact on videotape. And the scary thing is, they have something like a 95% accuracy rate. And this is all they look at. They look at this thing called bids. People reaching out to make a connection with another person. Like's happening right now between you and I. So how many contacts have you and I made so far today? You know, how many little moments have we had together? How many common noddings have you and I done? You know, when we just nod our head together. And kids are doing this with us all the time. You know, they're reaching out to make little connections with us. They make bids to connect with us. And all the Seattle Marriage Clinic looks at is 15 minutes of you two interacting, and they simply count the responses to the bids that we make to each other all the time. So, here's an example. I'm away from home. I do a lot of the cooking, well, most of the cooking in our house. But when I'm away, often the day when I'm getting home, Sylvian's made dinner, right? Because I often get home, if I'm away like this, I'll get home probably around 5 o'clock, and she'll be in the kitchen. So I'll open the door and I'll walk in the house. And I'll say something like, honey, I'm home. And she'll say, oh, I'm in the kitchen. I'm making dinner. Now, that's a bid to connect. Now I have to decide how to respond, right? So I can say to her, oh God, I hope it's not the same crap you made last time I was away. Huh? In which case I'm in serious trouble, aren't I? Right? Or I can say to her, oh, that's wonderful. I'm looking forward to sitting down and having a glass of wine and reconnecting. Not that I would ever give that long a speech. I would say something like, oh, that's great. That's a positive response. And for that, I might even get a hug, right? Or I could do nothing. I could just take the dog and go for a walk. All the Seattle Marriage Clinic does is count all them. The number of positives, the number of negatives, and the number of neutral. And if you don't have more positives than you have negatives and neutrals, wave goodbye to that relationship. And the reality is there are hundreds and thousands of these that happen between us and our partner every day. You know, just little looks, a catching of the eye. Oh, did you see the car that just went by? These are little bids to be in relationship with other, to be connected in relationship with other. And the same thing happens with kids, you know? So you walk in the room, you're the teacher, or you're the replacement teacher, and the kids know you because, you know, you've been there before. And you walk in the room and this kid looks at you and goes, oh, fuck, not you again, you know? And you go like, however you interpret that. But now in the future, when you walk in the room and the kid says, oh, fuck, not you again, I want you to look that kid in the eye and say, yes, it is. And today's your lucky day because we get to spend time together, right? It's like, it's a bid to connect, even though we don't often recognize it for what it is. And in these little moments that we have with kids, where we're focused on loving and being in relationship and hanging out with them and being in the now, this is where things develop, in those little moments. It's not like, hi, my name's Tom. I'd like us to go for a 3-hour walk so we can develop a relationship of trust and respect for one another and therefore have a happy therapeutic time together. It's not going to happen, right? You're the nicest person in the world, but they just don't know it yet. Being. Being leads us to interpreting. And the first element under interpreting, of course, is this thing that we call meaning making. We all have to make sense of things in our own way. And we're doing it all the time. And everybody does it all the time. So, in Quebec, the wine shop used to have these beautiful wine bags, back in the days when they still gave out plastic bags, you know. They used to have these beautiful bags. They were fluorescent pink or fluorescent blue. Don't ask me why. It's like boys' bags and girls' bags or something. And you'd go to the wine shop, and they'd put your wine bottles in these fluorescent bags. Well, one day I'm at home, and I decide to look out the window. And I notice that my neighbor's garbage can and recycling bin are just sort of tossed randomly in his yard. Well, I don't know what it's like, but in my community it goes like this. On Monday, the garbage guys come by. They take the lid off your garbage can, throw it in the general direction of your house, take the can, dump it in the back of the truck, and then throw that in the general direction of your house. So it might end up in the you know, halfway in the street or near a bush or whatever. And your job as a good community citizen is to go out there and find the lid and match it up with the can and put it back in the corner of your yard. And then on Tuesday, the recycling guys come in, and the same thing happens all over again. Throw the lid this way, throw the bin that way, and my job is to go out there and get it. Well, I'd been at the wine shop, and I'd left the wine in the trunk of my car. And as I'm walking out to get the wine from the boot, I noticed my neighbor's garbage can and, you know, recycling bin are still in his yard. I'm going to my car. This is what I'm doing. Look at that bloody neighbor. I'm saying to myself, look at that bloody neighbor. He just doesn't care. You know, look, his grass is too long anyways. He doesn't pick up his garbage cans, you know. It's like running down the neighborhood or whatever. I'm having this sort of negative dialogue with myself about my neighbor, you know, how disrespectful he is and everything. And so I go out and I get my wine bags out of the car, one pink and one fluorescent blue, and I'm going back to my house and I start laughing. Because I'm imagining the neighbor looking out his window going, look at that neighbor. Oh, he's coming home with bags of wine. He must be a real drinker. No wonder he doesn't whatever. So while I'm doing it to him, he's doing it to me. And while you're doing it with kids, kids are doing it with you. And we always have to ask this question. I wonder what my behavior might mean to this child. I wonder what my response might mean to this young person. Young person comes into a group home. Excuse me, it's a two-story affair. The boys' rooms are on the ground floor, and the girls' rooms are on the first floor. And the boy's walking around, and he puts his foot on a step that leads upstairs. Well, you know what he's doing? He's exploring the territory. He's a new kid, hasn't been there before. He's exploring the territory, he's wandering around, because that's what they have to do to become familiar. A lot of the early behavior of young people in our programs is simply familiarization behavior. I need to know what's here so that it is predictable for me. That's why they push you in the early days, you know, and reject you and whatever, because they need to know. So he's walking around. He puts his foot on the bottom step. The staff over there by the pillar sees him doing that, and she says, I wouldn't do that if I was you. And the boy turns around, looks at her, and says, fuck you, I don't need this shit, and ran away. Well, I'm thinking. Later, we have a chance to debrief. Here's what happened. The boy's wandering around, exploring the territory. He had no intention of going upstairs at the moment. He might have, but, you know, but the staff had forgot to tell him the rule. And as he puts his foot on the bottom step, the staff goes, oops, I forgot to tell him the rule. So she says, I wouldn't do that if I was you, trying to save him from making a mistake that would get him in trouble. So she's trying to save him. The kid hears the raised voice, sees the pointed hand, and thinks, this is what I got at home all the time. I don't need this. I'm out of here. See, people interpreting behaviors. And with the best of intention, you know, the staff tried to be helpful, but the child didn't see it as helpful at all. The child saw it as threatening and potentially dangerous. Happens all the time. When you walk in the room and there's 3 kids sitting at a table, 4 kids sitting at a table, and you're just coming back on shift or you're just coming back into the program, and you got to say hello. To whom do you say hello first? Because in this case scenario, if I say, hi, Bob, how you doing? They might think that's a gender thing. Or they might think, sure, guy to guy. Or they might think, oh, Bob's the favorite. And they think, oh, whatever. Because they have to.
They will not think that.
They won't think that, not with you, eh? Okay. But they have to interpret it somehow. And so we're constantly paying attention to this thing that we call meaning making. We're focused continually on context. All behavior serves a purpose, and all behavior occurs in a context. Behavior has meaning in the context within which it occurs. Take away the context, and the behavior has less meaning. So, for example, imagine a kid standing here like this and just like shaking and doing all this kind of stuff and swearing and cursing. And you look at this child doing this, and you have to make sense of it. But as I'm demonstrating, it's totally out of context. So now imagine that there's a mom on one arm and a dad on the other, and they're involved in a terrible divorce, and they're both trying to pull this kid to them, and so this kid feels torn apart and has to respond to that somehow. And so this struggle is what's represented in the behavior. But we only understand it when we understand the context. So when we see a behavior that we don't understand, perhaps one of the things we can do is shift our focus from the behavior itself to the context within which it's occurring. Because on some level, this behavior makes absolute sense. The narrative therapist told us that there's a different question that we can ask. And that is this question: to what problem is this behavior a solution? The child who feels threatened in the group home runs away. She solves her problem. She no longer feels threatened. The kids who are being abused by staff who run away are no longer abused. The staff or the young person who breaks something, smashes a window, punches a hole in the wall. To what problem is that behavior a solution? And usually that invites us to open up and look more at the context of the behavior so that we can understand it differently. We have a needs-based focus, and I've been playing with that a little bit over the last few minutes. When we say this person ran away to be with her, we go like, he has a need for belonging. She has a need for fun. When you see a behavior, here's another question you can ask. What need is being met by this behavior? So a young person pushes another young person, and you ask yourself, what need of the young person's is being met by that behavior? Maybe they're feeling threatened. Maybe they have a need, as we all do, to feel some sense of control. The young person who can't handle the structure and doesn't know what to do with structure for whatever reason, always feels dumb, incompetent, whatever, when there's too much structure. So they push away at the structure, or they run away from the structure, because we all have a need to have some sense of control in our life. And when we take young people and we put them in care programs, we take away most of the control that they have in their life. We tell them what time to get up, what time to eat, what time to shower often, what time to, all the way through the whole day. Now, if I came into your life and I said to you, okay, from now on, you're getting up at this time every day of the week, you're eating at this time, here's the food you're allowed to eat. See how I'm taking control away from you? Well, we all have a need for some kind of control. So when we talk about needs, I don't want us to limit ourselves to thinking about things like Maslow's hierarchy. We all know Maslow's hierarchy, right? You know, the pyramid we all learned in school. Or even the Circle of Courage talks about 4 basic developmental growth needs: belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. And Glasser talked about 5 different needs. So pick a model, I don't care, and then let yourself go beyond that to think about things like, does a human being have a need to feel good about themselves? You do, don't you? So it doesn't necessarily fit into a nice smooth framework like belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity, or doesn't necessarily fit somewhere clean on Maslow's hierarchy. But when we think like that, and we ask ourselves the question, I wonder what need is being met by this behavior, we have just created a wonderful opportunity for ourselves. Because if I think he's meeting his need for belonging by running away to be with his family because there's something going on, you know, to be with some friends because that's where he feels safe and secure or whatever, I've just told myself something that I really need to do, and that is help him find a different way to meet his need for belonging so that that behavior is no longer necessary. So part of our jobs when we talk about having a needs-based focus is we ask ourselves the question, when we look at all those behaviors that we're unhappy with, we ask ourselves the question, what need might be being met by this behavior, and how else can the young person meet that need in a manner that is more satisfying, less painful, whatever it happens to be for himself and the other people in his life. So we work to find ways to help young people meet their needs in such a manner that their previous behavior is no longer necessary. And I have seen it work like magic. That rather than focusing on him always saying whatever and giving him consequences for it and trying to punish it out of him, and by the way, B.F. Skinner, the grandfather of behavior modification, he said punishment doesn't work. 1949 when he said that. He said people just didn't listen to me. I never said that punishment worked. All punishment does is drive the behavior underground. And if you don't meet the need that lies underneath the behavior, it's just going to show up as a different behavior someplace else. So for example, I like to say to people, I can stop any kid from running away. All I have to do is lock them up. The behavior's gone. But if I haven't met the need, something else is going to show up, which is why we often see kids who go into secure programs, you know, for various reasons, whether it's because we protect them for their own safety, we protect them from access to drugs or whatever it happens to be. But if we don't deal with what's underneath it, then when they go into those programs, some other behavior that's really problematic shows up, like they become cutters, or they become violent towards others, or they become... And Skinner himself, in 1949 in Walden 2, said, they got me all wrong. I never said punishment would work. So I'm busy trying to punish him to make him stop saying these words I don't like. And I might be able to make him stop saying those words, but he's just going to do something else unless we figure out what's underneath that behavior. A needs-based approach. We are strength-based and resilience-focused. Jim talked about that some this morning, so we don't have that much time. I'm not going to continue. And it's also a pretty common thing to say these days that we're strengths-based and resilience-focused. I'm always amazed that so many of the kids that I worked with were actually alive. You know what I mean? They've been through so much, so many of them, and they bounce back. You know, and resilience is that science term that says, basically means it returns to its original form, right? That's what resilience means. So even though we might not like the form, you know, given what they've been through, I'm just amazed that so many of them are still alive. They bounce back, and they bounce back, and they get beaten down further, and still they come back somehow, right? We may not like the way they are when they act in the world, but God, you got to admire their strength and their resilience, that they actually got through all of that. Stuff that would crack a lesser person. And we're developmentally responsive, or responsively developmental. This young boy came into our program one time, and he was younger than the kids we normally took. He was only 11, and the program was built for teenagers, but his behavior was so problematic that they asked us if we would take him into this program. because we were doing pretty good with some pretty angry kids. And so we said yes. And so he came in the program. He was like pretty stocky kid, a little chubby, roly-poly, but pretty solid. And, you know, kind of didn't really look 11, maybe looked 13 or something, right? And we had this student doing a placement with us. And I walk into the program one day, and she's at the table playing this little kids game with this Tyler, was his name, with this boy Tyler. And it's like a children's game, not like an adolescent's game. And I go and I say to her, time to chat. Like, what are you doing? She says, well, I'm playing that game. It says it's good for kids who are, you know, sort of 8 to 11. And she'd just come from a placement where she'd been working with pre-adolescent kids in a school. So she understood the importance of activities, but she also was responding to him like an 11-year-old. And as she said that, I realized we'd been treating him like he was 14. Because all the other kids in context were 14. We were used to treating kids like they were teenagers. And without even thinking about it, we just started to treat him like he was a teenager. And when I saw him sitting at the table, once I got rid of my bias and my need to correct her behavior, once I got past that and I saw this kid sitting at the table, I actually saw an 11-year-old that I hadn't seen before, right? I hadn't seen the 11-year-old child. I'd seen the problematic behavior that were often associated with adolescence in the context of an adolescent program, and therefore I had acted towards him as if he was an adolescent. Context, right? Developmentally appropriate. We're family-oriented. I know Jim said this morning that we should always think about family because a high percentage of the kids go home, and that's true. I don't really agree with him that we should buy them Adidas running shoes, of course. And here's my reason why.
Nike are better.
Because Nike are better, that's absolutely correct. Here's my reason why. So one day this girl living in a group home goes home for the weekend, okay? And the child care worker goes with her. And the child care worker and the mother and the daughter start to unpack the girl's bag when she gets home, right? From the clothes for the weekend and whatever. And the girl pulls out this bottle of shampoo. And she pulls out the bottle of shampoo, and the mother just throws up her hands in the air and leaves the room. And comes back a little bit later, and it's clear that she's been crying. And she says to the staff, you may as well just take her back. And the staff, bless their soul, explores why. And it's because this bottle of shampoo cost $11. Because her social worker had made her a promise that if you do this and this and this, we can get you a special treat. What would you like? And the girl says, oh, I'd like a bottle of whatever this shampoo is, right? So the girl did it. The social worker gave her the bottle of shampoo. The girl took the bottle of shampoo home, opened it up. The mother looked at it and basically said, I can't compete with you guys. You see, and that's what she was able to articulate with the child care worker afterwards, which was, all I can buy are these sort of gallon jars of shampoo that cost $2, you know, because we don't have the money to afford this. So when we think family-oriented, so there's this child care worker and working in a group home. Kelly Shaw, she was going to come. It's too bad she had to cancel. And, excuse me, she's working in a group home, and this girl, Shelley, who'd been doing really well in the program, called after, or asked Kelly after school, can I go to the mall to hang out with my friends? Kelly's thinking, well, you know, she's 13, 14, whatever she is. The kids in this small town hung out at the mall, you know, didn't tend to get into trouble or anything. Kelly's thinking, it couldn't be too bad. She says, let's check with your mom. So she phones up mom at home. Says, you know, blah, 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 wants to go to the mall. Is that okay with you? The mom says, in our family, the kids aren't allowed to hang out at the mall by themselves until they're 15. And imagine if Kelly had just made this mistake and said, no, you're doing really well, that's okay. She just violated family values, didn't she? Family values, family beliefs, family rules, whatever it is. She just positioned herself to be the enemy. just like the child care worker or the social worker who bought that really fine bottle of shampoo, just positioned herself to be the other who can do better for my child than I possibly can. So when we say we're family-oriented, I like to think of it in that much broader sense of what are the values and beliefs that the families hold, which we need to respect, because there are some they might hold that we're not going to respect, but what are the values and beliefs that they hold that we need to respect in our day-to-day interactions and working with the young person, and of course, with the family itself. And down here under interpreting, of course, we have this idea of it's all about us. Jim was mentioning this morning about self, you know, the self of the child care worker. I'm amazed by the number of child care workers I meet who think they leave themselves at home when they go to work. You know, that their values, their beliefs, their biases, their prejudices, their hopes and dreams and aspirations don't walk through the door with them. But it's my experience that they do. And it's also my experience that child and youth care workers have needs, just like kids do. They need to feel competent. They need to feel in control. They need to, right, be significant, to be meaningful in the world. And if one of the ways I've chosen to meet my needs is to be helpful in relationships with others, and the others aren't very accepting of my attempts to be helpful in relationship with them, I may become annoyed or defensive or unhappy or whatever, because my needs are not being met. As a supervisor, I have to be able to say, there's got to be another way for you to meet those needs than through the children's behavior, right? But just like, if you really hate the color blue, for whatever reason, you just hate blue, it makes you sick. You know, it makes you want to kill yourself. And this child wants to paint their room blue, right? And you're thinking, I will be sick. I will have to kill myself before I'll let the child paint their room blue. And so you bring out the color chart for mauves and reds and yellows and oranges and anything but blues. You say to the child, here, you can choose from these. See the freedom of choice? I've just given you the freedom of choice. Oh, there are no blues. How about that? Yeah. It's all about us in many ways. And the bottom line in It's All About Us is this, isn't it? It's you in relationship with another human being. If that's not all about you, or all about us, you and me, then I don't know what else is. And all of that relates, and all we've been talking about relates to this thing on the bottom, that effective child and youth care practice is reflective practice. We are constantly thinking about what it is that we're doing. And I'm surprised by the number of people that I meet who not only think they left themselves at home, but don't think they're worth thinking about while they are at work. You know, that I don't even bother to think about me. Never mind thinking about all this other stuff about, you know, the child's behavior and what need might be being met or whatever. Or reflective in the sense of, I wonder why I wanted to do that. And I wonder why I did do it. What made me think that that would be a good idea? You know, when things go wrong and the child doesn't respond, we blame them often. They're resistant, you know. The mother's resistant. Met a mother one time. She was going to school, college, university, actually. You know, she was going to university. And her daughter was living in a group home. And the mother thought, if I go to college, single mom, if I go to college, I'll get a better job. If I get a better job, I can get a better place to live. If I get a better place to live, I'll be able to create a better life for my daughter, and she'll be able to come home. Made a lot of sense to me, right? Whether she's right or not, I really liked her motivation. She got a new social worker who said they had to meet Thursdays at 3. The mother says, I can't. Social worker says, why not? She says, I got a class at 3. Social worker says to her, well, you're going to have to decide. Do you want to work on your family, or do you want to keep going to school? And for the mother, the two things were exactly the same. I read the report. She was resistant, uncooperative, not willing to, takes us all the way back to this whole top level here, which is meaning making. It's all about us and how we interpret things, and based on our interpretation, we act, and all of this just feeds it. And then finally, once we've been there and be in relationship with them, and once we interpret things, then we have to act. Francis Ricks always said that, I'm just going to say this to the women in the room, if you've never read Francis Ricks' stuff, R-I-C-K-S, go read her stuff. She's retired now. She's absolutely awesome in terms of being a brilliant thinker about self in relationship and working with kids. Francis Ricks once said that caring is an action verb. If you care, you do. Caring is an action verb. So it's not surprising that it's about connection and engagement. Connection in this little way that we talked about. And I'm here to tell you this. If you are not connected at the moment of intervention, it's not going to work. It's like if we're not connected at the moment of intervention, you may as well have your back to me. No. If I'm paying attention to you and try to intervene with him, it's not going to work. I need to be in this moment with you, connected in relationship, if my intervention is going to work. And then I need to engage with you in different ways in your life. Connection and engagement. We pay attention to rituals of encounter. I remember one time going to, I teach a course at Ryerson University sometimes, and I'm in the classroom early and I'm welcoming people. This woman walks in the classroom and I go to shake her hand and she takes a step back and does this, you know. I'm going like, what's that about? Because this was years ago. It's because of who she is as a woman inside her particular beliefs and framework and religion and everything. She's not allowed to touch men, right? Well, interpreting, I had to interpret, of course, but I had to learn a new way to greet her, right? Just like some guys like to be greeted like that, and some guys like to be greeted differently. And some women like to be greeted like that, and some women like to be greeted differently. And so we learn the individual ways of encounter with each of the young people with whom we work, whether that be cultural or individual or whatever it happens to be. So that when each day comes and I'm connecting with you, I acknowledge something about you just through that brief momentary ritual of encounter. Leon Fulcher, when he talks about this, likes to talk about the Maori tradition of greeting, which is when you come together, you probably did it last week or whenever you guys were together, they put their foreheads together and touch their noses together, and they're literally sharing breath is the idea, right? That's a ritual of encounter. Handshakes are rituals of encounter because historically a handshake, right hand, meant my weapon hand is empty. I come in peace, right? So historically, while it's a habit almost nowadays, you can see it was an important ritual of encounter. It was saying, I am not a threat, I am also vulnerable. Unless, of course, he was left-handed. Right? Everything we do for a purpose. We talk about intentionality of action. You know, when I was saying, so here I come into the room and here's these 4 people. Which one am I going to say hello to first? Right? And I say everybody's going to interpret it in their own way. Then I say, okay, so whatever you do, do it intentionally. Right? She feels powerless in this group. Sometimes they pick on her. He's got a lot of good stuff going. She feels insignificant and powerless. They like me. They think I'm a good guy. They think I'm important in their life. I'm going to say hello to her first. To say you are significant or you are of value. And then I'm going to have to worry about how other people interpret it. But see, that's intentionality of action. So we like to say there is no time. There's no time to just mess around. Everything you do with a purpose. These kids have been in pain long enough. Let's get on track here and let's get things done. We meet others where they're at. Of course, that refers to meeting them in the schoolyard and in the home and in the program and in the whatever. But also where they're at emotionally, psychologically. You know, the child who's depressed does not need, I don't know, Tommy Happy Face approaching her every morning. Hi, my name's Tommy, aren't you glad to see me? Fuck off, leave me alone. Okay, yeah. Like she's depressed. Maybe I need to meet her energy somehow. And from there, we can go someplace else. If I meet you where you're at, we can always move on. But otherwise, maybe we'll be just like ships that pass in the night, right? Not interested in connectedness. We engage in the purposeful use of activities, which kind of goes without saying, like the story of the young boy, who was 11 and she was engaging with him as a child to build a relationship. Karen Vandervan, another brilliant thinker in our field, said, you become what you do. So be careful what activities you choose to do with children, right? Choose activities that help them grow in a certain way, as opposed to doing them randomly. One day I went into this program. It turned out the kids were supposed to be going to the gym that night. You know how so many programs, they have scheduled activities? They were supposed to be going to the gym that night or doing something, but it turned out they were going to the golf range instead. And asked them why were they going to the golf range, and the staff said, well, she thought it would be good for the kids. They could hit things, get the energy out, and it would teach them hand motor coordination and eye motor coordination or whatever. And she gave me this long spiel, and then she confessed that she had a golf tournament tomorrow and needed to practice herself. It's all about us, isn't it? That was a purposeful use of activities for herself, not for other. Rhythmicity, we talked about, and, of course, being emotionally present. In this relationship with the young person, they need for us to be emotionally present with them. For myself, as an emotional, full human being, to be in contact with their emotional self as a full human being. And so often, we try to create this distance. When I went to school to learn to be a family therapist, because I did that, they told me that we had to keep an appropriate professional distance in our relationships. And when I was trained to be a child care worker, I was encouraged to create an emotional distance with children, because if I got too engaged, they would manipulate me. Like how weak am I, right? That they would manipulate me. And I just want to say, as I walk away from this section, that this is exactly what our children need, is people who are willing to take the risk to become emotionally involved with them in a healthy, respectful, dignified, and helpful manner. But they need for us. Imagine if you went through your life and people kept their distance from you all the time. How significant would you feel? Little girl changes classes, comes home after changes schools, comes home after she's been in the school for a number of months, and the mother says, how's it going? And the girl says, my new teacher doesn't like me. And the mother says, how do you know? She seems nice. And the little girl says, she never touches me. It was one of those schools who had a no-touch policy, right? And so, but in the other program, the teacher would say things like, good job, or that's nice, and touch them. And the girl learned that touch relates to caring and liking. And now she's in a place where touch isn't allowed. Well, as we draw these boundaries, because there is a tension in our field right now between people who believe in intimacy with young people in the way that I've been talking about it, and people who believe in distance with young people. Whether it's about touch, or whether it's about emotional presence, or whether it's about the subjects that we talk about, or whatever it happens to be. This is the only thing I know for sure after 40-some years of working in this field. Children need us to be willing to be emotionally engaged with them. Child and youth care is a way of being in the world. We take these characteristics, we live them, be them, as we focus on the everyday life events of the young person. Effective child and youth care practice involves making moments meaningful, or the therapeutic use of everyday life events. And we always ask the question, how is this moment related to the overall goal, with a major focus of creating safety in relationships with adults? The meaningful use of daily life events is the foundational characteristic of child and youth care practice. And in a way, that's probably the only foundational characteristic. And all the rest of this just kind of feeds that, how do I make this moment with this child meaningful in a way that they haven't experienced before? It's not a set of techniques, it's rather simply a way of being in the world. As Carol Stewart said, the relationship is the intervention. As Jerry Fuster said, we live, grow, and die, and all change occurs in the context of relationship. And so in our work with young people, these things help us focus on the notion, well, it's gone. These things on this piece of paper I gave you help us focus on the notion of relational safety and safety in the relationship. Because once we create that experience, the rest of it comes pretty easy. It's now 1 o'clock, so I get to stop and go and have a nap because I'm on a different time zone than you guys. So thank you for your time.